talked before about taking an all asset approach to inheritance tax planning and the practical reasons for doing that. Practical reasons being that inheritance tax planning in practice is really dependent on the assets that you own. And some assets are undoubtedly a little easier to plan for than others, mostly because when planning for lifetime giving, lifetime inheritance tax planning, generally, we always have to be conscious of the gift with reservation and pre-owned assets tax provisions, i.e. basically if a gift's going to be effective for inheritance tax, you need to give it away and retain no further access to the asset that you've given away. That makes it really hard when it comes to your main residence. How can you give that asset away without retaining access to an enjoyment of it, i.e. living in it? Well, if you don't want to live in it, great, just going to give it away, fantastic. And no CGT issues to worry about either. But if you want to carry on living in it, then you're going to have to pay a full market rent. I've talked about that before. That's why some people who have a main residence as a main part of their estate, but also want to carry out lifetime giving, would consider, and it's counterintuitive for many, I completely get this, but will consider a lifetime mortgage, i.e. taking a loan on the property, taking the money out and using that money to make a gift. Of course, you've got a debt on the property, got interest to pay, which will usually roll up and create a further debt. And then you give the assets away. And after 7 years, they're out of your estate immediately, but you don't take them into account for your final HT calculation once you've survived 7 years. All good. Some have then thought, actually, what if I could get so-called double bubble? I take the money out of my property by a loan. The debt reduces the value of that property for inheritance tax. I've now got the money and I invest that money. So I want to do something now with that money to improve my family's overall inheritance tax position. I invest that in a business relief qualifying asset and I keep that because I want some access and control. Actually, I don't really want to give it away. So I keep it. And after 2 years, that asset is outside of my estate. Then I've got an asset that's outside of my estate and a debt on my estate. So that's pretty good, except that in 2013, legislation was introduced to say that after the 17th of July in that year, I think, any debt that you take to invest in a business relief or agricultural relief qualifying asset will be treated for inheritance tax purposes, regardless of how it is treated from a legal standpoint, will be treated as charged on that asset that qualifies for relief. So you won't be able to put a charge over an asset that would otherwise be subject to inheritance tax and reduce its value for inheritance tax. You will have to put that debt against the asset that already qualifies for inheritance tax relief. So no double bubble, okay? That was just a sort of slight warning. It's also something that also applies for non-domiciliaries. People have been in the news quite recently, borrowing, putting a charge over assets that would be subject to inheritance tax, UK cited assets, and buying excluded property. So that also doesn't work. So those rules in force for some time now. I thought it was quite recently, but 2013, it doesn't work to borrow money, from an inheritance tax standpoint anyway, to borrow money and try to charge other assets and then buy business relief qualifying property. Again, a lot of information on this and detail in TechLink.